Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast. It is day 51. We are almost through the book of Numbers. We will complete that by the end of today's video. And so excited to be back again, joined by my friends, my wife, Victoria, my friend, Shameeka. We are here to bring Numbers to a close. Yesterday, we kind of left off with the vows and just kind of this law about vows, but we kind of move into this war. So earlier, God kind of charged the Israelites to kind of go after the Midianites based off of the worship of Baal piece, but now we get this actual war and this pillaging of their people and things of that nature. What stuck out to you guys in 31 in this like attack on the Midianite people that resulted in, sheep and women and all sorts of stuff that they ended up bringing back with them.
Yeah, I think this is the fulfillment of what God had asked him to do a couple chapters ago. When we talked about it yesterday, it was like, you should seek vengeance against Midianites for this whole Peor incident. Baal, at Peor for worshiping Baal. And so like here they are. I am glad to see that they have like gone out and gone to war. And y'all know, me and this Balaam, gotta bring him up again.
Right.
Balaam in verse 8. And then they also killed Balaam, the son of Beor, with the sword. And because down in verse 16, they gave the reasons why. Behold, these, meaning the women, on Balaam's advice, called the people of Israel to act treacherously. Let me get my words together. Treacherously against the Lord in the incident of Peor. So a plague came among the congregation of the Lord. And so that's exactly what we were just talking about yesterday, right?
Yeah.
And like, I was just like, come on, Balaam. Like, we kind of could tell when we were talking about him a couple, like, was that last week?
Yeah.
That like his heart wasn't really like for God. His heart was for money, for divination, for what he was able to tap into.
Yeah.
The Lord still used him.
Yeah.
And, but you could tell that like the Lord was not his only God, because he was still doing other things and doing other practices and and so here we even just see that like he's the one who enticed these Midianite women to invite the Israelites to sacrifice and to Baal and bow down to them, and the whole drama that happened yesterday that we read about. So it's kind of like, Balaam, you're doing too much. One chapter you blessing the Israelites on behalf of the Lord.
Yeah.
The next you turning them against the Lord and to worship Baal. So yeah.
Yeah, and who paid you to go to send them out there?
Who was it?
To go mess up, what God was doing.
It had to be some money involved.
Yeah. That is what they got to me.
I mean, I think it's interesting thought, because in one case, Balaam set out to essentially curse Israel, mostly because that's what he was asked to do.
Right.
And God didn't allow it, right? Like God kept giving him blessings essentially to give it. And so it is interesting to me that I feel as if God did allow this temptation of the Midianite women to take place, right? That there was kind of like, all right, this blessing curse piece, we just talked about the vows yesterday, right? The words, like that's kind of too big of a deal for me to just like, not intervene here. But the temptation, like, I'm not going to force you to love me, right?
Yeah.
Like I'll bless you. I will make sure that the words that come out of my mouth towards you are still for your good, even when it's intended elsewhere. But when it comes to the situation of the gods and what you're enticed to do, like, I don't want to force you to love me, and I'm not going to. And so I'm not going to intervene and just like get rid of them. I'm going to give you that option. And now they chose the wrong way. But like, I did think it was interesting that God could have stepped in there too, right?
Yeah.
In the same way that he stepped in for Balaam, it caused him to actually bless the Israelites. I found it interesting that he didn't step in kind of the piece that they're referring to there. But yeah. I'd say probably one of the biggest things that jumped out to me was just like, it also just felt like, despite the purpose of this war and like where they go, like why they go to attack the Midianites, it's like they still didn't learn their lesson though.
Yeah.
Because they bring back all these women. Like they bring back all these women after the women are the reason that they worship the gods, you know, Baal in the first place and offer sacrifices to him. Like, their idea was, well, let's bring them back. Let's bring some back. And I was just like, and I love that Moses gets like really upset.
Yeah,
like he gets mad. Like, do you guys not understand? I'm trying to remember where this,
Verse 13.
oh yeah, verse 14, right? But Moses became furious with the officers, the commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds who were returning from their military campaign. He says, have you let every female live? He asked them. Yet they are the ones, as you mentioned, at Balaam's advice, right? Like, literally, you're just gonna bring them back? And I just think it's so funny. And it's so human. Like, it's so such us, right? That like we want to obey the Lord, but still like hold on a little bit to
Can I do it now?
For sure.
Can I do it now?
Yeah, like
Midnight woman now.
It really showed their weak spot. It was like, that was your weakness.
Yeah.
Like in the first place, and even now it's like you probably looking as you slaughtering these men, and you like, well, not the women. We can't do it.
Must have been baddies or something like this. What was it about these women?
Right.
Listen. Moses himself ended up with a Midianite woman. Like,
Did. And I that is true. But even in that, here we go. We still see this kind of like grace and mercy for the women, where the ones who were involved with like sleeping with men, they were the ones that were killed, but the virgins, like they were able to be saved. And I was like, okay, that's cool, because I guess to that point, for a virgin, someone who has never been, you know, involved with a man in that way, then like they wouldn't have seduced the men, you know, been a part of like seducing the men. And so, I think for them, this was a very much so like a learning experience of like, we've heard about it, because I'm sure they have, like heard about what was done, and we're being spared, like our lives are being spared, and as a result, like, let me make sure I don't do what the other women did before, because we see how that turned out. So
yeah,
I think it's also interesting that Phineas was the one who went into battle with them. He was the one who, you know, jabbed old boy. So he had the zeal. So like, send him back in there. Send him in the ring, because he's about it. But don't you guys think it was interesting that like all the gold and silver and bronze and stuff, like it had to be passed through like water or fire and stuff, like like before you even bring any of their stuff into the Lord's holy camp, like it needs to be purified, and then you yourselves need to be purified. Like you guys need to stay outside the camp.
Stay out of camp.
They need to like purify themselves again, wash your clothes, all of that, because it's like you've been in this land that has been defiled with stuff that has been used and misappropriated, right? With all these, you know, people. And so it's like, no, you can't just bring anything into the Lord's presence. And I think that's just such a good reminder for us to like, you can't just say, Lord, I want your presence, and then just be a whole bunch of mess in front of him, right? And so he's like, remember that everything needs to be holy. You guys were holy. You guys were set apart. Like, you guys have gone through all these purification things. Like, so even the things that you are bringing into this camp where I dwell needs to be holy and purified.
I know that speaks to Victoria. She be the first to be like,
that needs to stay outside.
Something coming to this house like, no, I don't know where that came from.
I don't feel right. I don't feel, babe, put that on the porch and put that in the trash can. Something in the house. I don't know what that is.
That's real.
Start burning stuff.
Pass it through the fire, babe.
Through the fire.
The kids gonna be like, Mama, what you doing?
If it can make it lasts, we can keep it. Anything else?
Oh, so yeah. Also, isn't the Lord generous? how much he required of them as a sacrifice versus like how much they got to keep for themselves. That was crazy, the amount that they got to keep. I'm looking at like, how do you really have 675,000 sheep? Like that's a lot of sheep, and only the Lord required 675 of them total. Like just even the amounts that he required for himself just remind me of tithing, of like he gives us 90%.
I mean, in this case, it's like 0.01% that he takes. So it's not even, he didn't even take 10%.
No.
You're right, and I think that is a good call out, right? Just I think, you know, that 90 versus 10, right? I don't think we ever focus on how much God gave us. We just focus on what we're losing when we tithe, right? People that, you know, many of us, we can struggle with that idea of giving away, you know, our income, and we look at that amount and go, I know what I could do with that, right? I could use that for something, but not focus on the fact that what God leaves us with and gives us. So,
more than the government.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I was gonna say, it also just stuck out to me that, like, even again in this wilderness season, we've talked about some of how God has been purposeful for what's taking place during these 40 years and making sure that it's still benefiting the generations to come and his people. But like, I'm like, this is a lot of stuff to have kind of come across and continue to accumulate, like in this wilderness, right? Like we joke that like, they've been eating manna every day, but like legit, they've been offering sacrifices of sheep and lamb, and, you know, all this kind of stuff. Like there is meat that they're getting, and there's, you know, other things that they still have in this time that they weren't really like living in poverty, you know, in poverty,
right,
you know,
right.
by any stretch of imagination, but that they still had a lot of stuff, and God was often giving them stuff even in the midst of it. So that just kind of jumped out to me too.
Yes. That's good.
Okay. So, that war was interesting. That's 31, 32. We kind of get this negotiation about some land. We have a couple tribes that take the lead. I think another tribe joins them here at the end, but like that take the lead of saying, you know what, we actually like the land where we are. We kind of like what's here before us. And so we're okay. We don't necessarily need that land in Canaan. Let's take what we have before us. Anything that just jumped out to you guys as, you know, the tribes of Gad and Reuben kind of petition for this land before the Jordan?
Yeah, I thought that was so strange. I was like, one, that's a really risky, bold thing to do, is to be like, hey, we don't want to come into the promised land, like, and have that as an inheritance. Like, can we have this instead? And we've talked about like how much of their travel they've been from places to places and stuff like that, and we didn't really see this happen before, where it was like, they're just like, well, why we can't stay here? Like, I like this space, but we see this happening with them, and I was just like, I wanted to know more of their heart posture of like, but why do you not want to settle in the promised land with everyone else? This is all we've talked about and known, and like, this has been the goal the entire time, as far as like your journey that you've been on has been to go into this place flowing with milk and honey. So I'm like, was there any kind of like something in their heart where they felt like, actually, this is better than what we think is in the promised land, or not? Like, I just really didn't understand that, because I felt like they probably had opportunity to also go to the promised land and have their space there, but also explore around it and possibly inherit more land. So for them to just be like, we don't actually want to go into the promised land, like, don't make us cross the Jordan kind of thing. Like, I'm like, what's this about?
And it's like please don't make us go across the Jordan. I was like, that seems like a slap in the face of the Lord. Honestly, in my opinion. Like, he has brought y'all out. He's been telling y'all about this land since Abraham. But yet it's not good enough or something. Like, you rather have this. It reminded me of Lot, honestly. Where like, I'm not Lot. Lot, when he was sent to the mountains, and he was like, no, don't send me to the mountains, send me down here. And when he got down there, he was scared of the people there, and he ended up back in the mountains in the cave. Like, it just made him seem like, okay, where God's taking you, you're not trusting where he's trying to take you. Or like where you're trying to go. And it seems really juvenile to just love what you see with your eyes and what's in front of you. And still having like reached that point of faith in the Lord and what he has said, even though you haven't quite seen it with your own eyes, right? But I love Moses' response.
I was going to say that, yeah.
He was like, no, we're not doing this again.
Yeah.
He's like, we're not. I've been out here in this wilderness for 40 years because of y'all. Yeah. Over here not going and pursuing the promised land. We were so close. And you can tell it, like, he knows they are so close again, right? Like, we are this close. Don't y'all mess this up again. Like, don't y'all start getting timid and discouraging your brothers and not gonna. He goes on a whole rant, like, for sure. Let me listen. Y'all might be the young ones. Let me educate y'all. Okay? Yeah. Like, this is. Let me tell you what your parents did. Like, right. Get history. Don't do this again, okay? Don't repeat their mistakes because I'm not trying to be out here in the wilderness anymore. Like, although he knew he wasn't going to the promised land at this point, but still. So, I do love that he was really fervent about that. Like, listen, y'all not going to discourage the people again.
Yeah, I think that jumped out to me because particularly just also, despite their unwillingness to or desire to go, they weren't freed from the responsibility, right? Like, he's like, well, y'all got to come and still fight, right? One way or the other, y'all got to come with us. And that's the bare minimum. Like, you are still responsible for your part in making sure that this promise is fulfilled and that the Israelites receive what they're supposed to receive. And so I just thought that was interesting because I was just like, I do think it's a fair expectation, man. Like, we got to do our part, right? Even when we don't benefit from it, we're a part of the body, like the general body. Like, we got to do our part to make sure that we get what's, what God has promised us, in that regard. And so I thought that was an interesting thing. But the other thing that just did jump out to me, I think it reminds me of, there's this image or this kind of meme that's gone around before. I don't know if you guys have seen it, where like it's what's supposed to be Jesus, which, I'm going to disregard the image of Jesus here for a sec, and like this little girl, and like like he's like holding this like teddy bear, or she has like this small teddy bear, but he has like this big one behind his back, and like she refuses to let go of the small one, even though there's like greater behind him. And like I feel like that's what I was like imagining as I was reading this part, because it's like they were so content with like, okay, this teddy bear is fine, like this land is fine, like this is good enough. That they probably missed out on more, because it's never Moses's idea or God's idea for them to do this, right? It's not like the land could not hold them, right? When God promised them the land, he promised the land to all of them, right? So he had enough to give everybody, right? But yet they couldn't see past what was right in front of them. And again, I don't judge them, because I do think we often experience this, right? Like, like how hard is it for us to leave one job, right? Because it's like paying the bills and like we're just comfortable there, and we want to leave it to take the leap of faith to like start a business or something, right? Or how hard is it for us to leave that thing that we have now because we don't have the faith? God might say, hey, I got this for you, like do it. And we're like, but if that means I gotta let go of this, I'm not sure, because this is working for me. Like, I'm good. And
or that's a relationship, right?
I mean, I don't know what that's about. I mean, I'm good.
All I see is you, babe.
But right. But I say that to say, like, I think that is a general thing that we struggle with as humans, is like the faith to see beyond what we already have right now.
For sure. Especially as time goes by. It's like the more time goes by, the easier it is to lose that focus and faith, because you're like, we're in a microwave generation. We want it and we want it now.
Right.
And so, I can understand that.
It's a challenge, I'll say, for me, to also like Philippians 4 teaches us to like learn the secret of being content, right? In every situation. Like Paul teaches us that, more so the sense of like, whether we have little or a lot, like just find joy and contentment. But I think there's a difference between like contentment and like settling, right? Like there's a difference between like being content with what God has for me in this season, and like settling for less than what God has for me because like I'm unwilling to pursue that or chase or have the faith to go after it. And I think it is a challenge that like good enough is not good enough if like better is possible, right? Like if God has more for me. And that's a tough tension, right? Dynamic between like, God, I want to pursue what you have for me, but I also don't want to, you know, always seek and desire more for the sake of more, right?
Yeah.
Like it has to be what you have set aside for me specifically.
Yeah.
So we get to 33. 33 is an interesting kind of summary of all the places they travel. I don't know. This was a very interesting section for me because we don't get all of this throughout kind of numbers, right? Like we don't get a lot of, and then they went here and then they went here. It just kind of brings it all up together here in 33. So anything that stuck out to you guys specifically in 33?
I just love how detailed Moses is. Honestly, like you kept record and track of everywhere you guys went, like every step of the way, and even just seeing where the Lord led them.
Yeah.
I'm reading this and I'm getting exhausted. Like they've been everywhere.
They have.
They've been everywhere, and the crazy thing is this manna has been following them wherever they have gone.
Ooh, yeah.
Right? Like there was no lack in that provision.
Yes.
And that the Lord kept them. And I think, you know, at one point, I don't know if it was already said or was about to be said, but like he was like, your sandals haven't worn out in this wilderness. Like the Lord's been keeping you guys. I'm just looking at all these places, and I think we mentioned between us at one point, like this was like the city of LA, like the population of the city of LA, like getting up and moving around and like that's a lot of people. Now we're looking at potentially how much sheep they had and goats that they had.
Yeah, that was just the people. We're not talking about the livestock.
Livestock. And so now all this stuff and I'm just like for them. And then they started building the tabernacle, and so now it's all this stuff that they're moving to. And I'm just like, Lord,
and
like
you have children.
Yeah.
And y'all know how it is to load up a car just to go somewhere.
Just to go somewhere.
Forever to get in the car.
I'm looking for the closest spot to the door of the grocery store. Like these people been walking. Like
I even feel for the priests now, right? Because we know there's a priest that got to carry the pieces of the tabernacle
on their shoulders.
And their shoulders. And I'm like, yo, that wasn't just like 2 or 3 trips that they had to make on that. Like that was constantly. That's a good call out. I didn't even think about that manna piece. Like that's just like you said, that it was just going with him. His provision was also going wherever they went, which is really, that's good. Also, one thing that just jumped out to me was just how it started, and as they started to travel, kind of in verse 3, I just love how they just called out the Israelites went out defiantly, like in the sight of all the Egyptians. That like Moses like makes the point to let them know like they weren't released like and let free, and like this benevolent king said, oh yes guys, go on, but it was like no, this was still an act of God. Like they left out not on Pharaoh's like behest, but really like he resisted and did not desire that. And I just thought, again, it's just that reminder. You can tell Moses is taking time to just continue to remind the people, don't forget, like God did this for you, and don't let that go.
I even love how they say in verse 4 like that, like on their gods also the Lord executed judgments. And it's just like, so
I underlined it.
Did you? Yeah. It's like not only did he wage war against the Egyptians and the army, but he was like on their gods, that they this whole, like we already knew this was like a battle of gods, right? Like like our God versus all y'all quote unquote gods, right?
Little G. Little G's. That's good.
Good. Okay, kind of at the end here, there were some really kind of instructions for Canaan specifically. Anything that jumped out to you guys there before we get to 34? I mean, we kind of like take it really together, right? Because the end of 33, there's again just kind of these instructions on when you get to Canaan, but then it also starts to give us some boundaries and stuff for the different land. But anything in particular as we get these instructions for what will happen now that you get to Canaan?
I love the assurance of this language. For me, it's like in my version, it's like you shall drive out them and you will inherit. And you like, it's the certainty of this language of like, tell them what you're about to do.
Yeah.
Not what I want you to do, what I'm proposing for you to do. Like, no, you will drive them out.
Yeah.
And I love that he gives them that like confidence here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Good. Okay. Well, yeah, like I said, into 34, we kind of get some boundaries and some things of really trying to draw out a map, essentially, of like where everything should be. Anything that you guys thought was interesting about that, or even just the fact, why it's included, or anything of that nature in these instructions here?
Yeah, I appreciate the detail. Like, it just really shows that God is a God of order and of detail, and just the way that he spoke to them, it just seemed like he gave them the blueprint. Like, I keep saying that, like, he gave them the blueprint. He often gave them the strategies. And I'm just like, man, like, a lot of times in my life, in my walk with the Lord, it doesn't always seem as plain and clear as day as this. Like, and oftentimes I'm like, Lord, I need this. Like, show me A, B, C, and D. Like, lay it out, make it plain, write it out for me. Because then, like, I can have that assurance in following that. And so I really do appreciate, like, the detail and how God had a plan. Like, he had a plan, and he's making sure that everything and everyone is accounted for.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was important because, we keep calling out just how many people we're talking about. Right? And so I think it was important that like God had to be organized and had to kind of give instruction for that, because even as we get later in this and he starts establishing who the leaders will be, and all that like there had to be organization and structure in this, because again, especially when you're dealing with, again, millions is kind of what we assume in total people, not just the men. When you kind of get to that stage, it's like, let's be clear and establish boundaries and order. And again, it's something that feels like a theme of God, or a character trait of God, because whether it's in the family, or it's in the church, or it's in the the community or government, like there's order and there's structure, and that's something that seems to be something that is important to God.
And imagine the chaos that could have came out of that. I imagine they could have been fighting over what part of the land that we're going to get. No, I want this corner. No, you want it. Like, it could have been a lot of chaos. So, yeah.
And I think living in America, I probably don't appreciate this map that they're drawing up as much as if I lived there. And I know some of the names of some of these places have changed. But just even like the seas that they're talking, these boundaries, these borderlines, like, if I lived out there, I think it would be crazy. They'd be like, oh, yeah, and so you going to be on Pharaoh.
Yeah, that's a good just perspective, because, obviously, if you're trying to give me a map of South Carolina or California or somewhere I know, then that would probably make more sense and help me understand that. So again, maybe some good homework for us is to go look up, maybe go to the back of our study Bible and figure out exactly where all these places were. But okay, cool. So let's go to 35. After kind of talking about the boundaries and distributing and like leaders, they kind of deal with specifically the Levites, because as we know, if we recall from earlier, the Levites don't get land kind of dedicated to them in the same way that everyone else does. So we get some instructions for them specifically. Anything that you guys thought was interesting, maybe something that stuck out to you new this time as it dealt with the allotments for the Levites specifically?
These cities of refuge. Like, that's one thing that stuck out to me, because as they're talking about giving the Levites these land and stuff, you have these cities that are dedicated for someone who unintentionally kills someone to flee. And I thought that was very interesting, because we know that Moses, even though his killing of someone was intentional, he was someone who had to flee. But like, again, it's just showing like God is making a way to accommodate for just all people, it seems like. I mean, and that just really stuck out to me, because just knowing that it was unintentional, and if someone was to find out, of course they're going to try to harm them or kill them. Like, he's creating a safe space for them to be able to be and dwell without having any hurt, harm, or danger come near them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's not just for the Israelite people, but he also says for the stranger, the sojourner, like anybody who's living among them, that they also can have a place of refuge.
Yeah. I mean, just while we're on that city of refuge kind of idea, I know this like Avenger of Blood kind of phrasing and call out was just very interesting to me because, I mean, one, as you mentioned, like, yeah, it makes plenty of sense for somebody to be angry that somebody else, like, you know, died, whether it was intentional or not, right? And City of Refuge kind of helps to diffuse hopefully some of that anger and give you a place to kind of be safe. But I just thought it was just this very interesting rule that, like, if you catch them outside of the city, though,
Right. That's on you.
I say, yo, that was your fault for leaving the city.
Exactly.
You know, and they're not guilty of bloodshed. Like, they're within their right. And I was just like, yo, wait, what? So that just, I don't know. It's very interesting. I appreciate God giving the space and the place and being intentional about providing a place for people to have refuge. Yeah. But I do love, because it reminds me of just our relationship with God in general, and that, like, outside of his presence, like, you're on your own. You know what I'm saying? Like, it ain't even on your own,
real.
but like you're subject to the consequences of making decisions outside of that, right? Like, and that I have given you a place of refuge. I've given you a place to be that is safe, that is protected. If you choose to step out of that, like, that's on you. You know what I mean? And whatever consequences come with that is on you. So I don't know, and I'm not even gonna hold them accountable to that. Like, they are within their right at that point. Like, that's what I saw in verse. It was kind of later in the 20s. Can't find it now. But yeah, they were just like, yeah, he won't be held responsible. Like, he won't be responsible if he does that. I mean, hey, that's on him. Like, it was your fault kind of for leaving that place of protection.
Yeah. Also, I thought it was interesting that the person who was there, they had to stay until the death of the high priest that was in charge at the time. And I think that was in verse 25 that it mentions that. It was like the accused must stay there until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the holy oil. So even in that space, like, this is the stipulations in which you can leave. Don't leave any sooner. Like, but when that high priest die off, that's when you could kind of go back. Thought it was interesting.
I did too. That it was like, that was a significant date. It was when the high priest, not when the person who wanted to avenge dies or anything. The high priest, and everybody must honor that, no matter how mad you are. But don't you guys think it's interesting, this, like, verse 33 and 34? It says, you should not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. You should not defile the land in which you live in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the people of Israel. And I think that's, like, when we have heard in the past that, like, people have defiled the land, right? And, like, you go in and you wipe all these people out because they are continuously defiling my land and all that. Like, I wonder if, like, even this bloodshed part is a part of it. Like, that there was no atonement happening here. And that, like,
that's good.
And it's saying, I think it's interesting that, like you said, nothing, like, the high priest can't go and offer anything, like, for person-to-person bloodshed. Like, the only thing that can atone this is for the one who committed it. And so I'm just wondering, like, wow, like, how many lands are defiled here?
Seriously, because when I think about the defilement of the land, I often think about the worshiping of other gods and, like, the sexual immorality or whatever the case may be. But that is actually interesting. I do like that you pointed that out.
And I think it goes all the way back to Genesis 9, right? With, like, that's what God tells Noah at the time, that, like, well, definitely,
I was in Cain,
so that's Genesis 3, right, where it's his blood shed that ultimately, that curse and that defilement. But I meant, like, in Genesis 9, when God makes his covenant with Noah, he tells him at that time, like, if a man sheds another man's blood, right, essentially, like, that that's where, like, an eye for an eye or a life for a life really kind of comes in. It's by his blood, you know, that he will require the blood of that other individual as well in return. So Yeah, it's been that way kind of from the beginning, but great. So lastly, kind of here in the book of Numbers, we have chapter 36, and it's kind of a reference again back to these daughters of Zelophehad. I don't know if I did it right again. Zelophehad. But we get a little extra context because earlier we just got, hey, we need to make sure that the women of families, daughters of families, kind of have a way to inherit land. But his brothers come up and go, well, hold up. We also got to make sure that if they marry, the land stays within our family, right? So it's kind of what we get here in 36. Anything that was interesting to you guys as you read this portion?
Yeah, just that pointing out of the women needing to marry within their father's tribal clan. Yeah. Because then it does keep it within the family. This is the exception in which this can happen. And then again, we did talk about like later on, this will be something that continues on for those people or clans that may not have any men born into it. Like this is going to be that standard in which like this can be fulfilled so that they can keep an inheritance for their family.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also they mentioned like the inheritance can't be transferred.
Yeah,
from one tribe to another, and so just to keep it as is, and so I think it's just preventive. Measures here. So
yeah. I think what it was designed to do was also kind of discourage this like. We live in America, which is a capitalistic society. So like, it's all about more, acquiring more, right? Like more land, more money, more this, more that. And I think by establishing this, like, hey, this inheritance belongs to this tribe, no matter what happens, right?
Yeah.
Like this is gonna stay within the family. It kind of discourages that, like, well, let me go marry such and such's daughter so I can have the land of that, right, and have that as well. Like this pursuit of more to where generations down the road, Judah all of a sudden owns all 90% of Israel, because they've continued to pursue those things. So I think it helps to also just establish that like lack of competitive, capitalistic, go and get everything you can out of this land, but really to kind of just keep that fairness and that justice there.
That's good.
Yeah.
Eliminate the greediness.
Because they will do it, man. If you don't make rules, it's gonna be our nature to do that. But, that's it. Chapter 36, Numbers, is done. And so grateful again that you guys have joined us, and pray that this was encouraging. We're still in the middle of the week here, so we have 3 more days of reading as we go into Deuteronomy. But you can at least mark off 4 books complete of the Bible. So good for you. But yeah, we'll see you tomorrow as we pick up on Deuteronomy 1. Until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.